wildcard weekend matchups. Don't worry, because I'll break down all of the action that you missed from this past weekend. So starting off, we had a matchup between the Cleveland Browns and the Houston Texans. The Texans emerged victorious in this game with a final score of 45-14, so a big blowout by the Texans. And yeah, CJ Stroud, even though this was his rookie playoff debut, he played wonderfully. Took the top-rated Cleveland defense, or top 2-rated Cleveland defense, and made them look like absolute string cheese. I was astonished by his amazing movement. He just looked great out there. It was so easy. So the game leaders from this one, you had Joe Flacco completing 34 of 46 passes for 307 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. You had CJ Stroud completing 16 of 21 passes for 274 yards and 3 touchdowns. That matches the rookie playoff record for most touchdown passes in a game. Then rushing the ball, you had Kareem Hunt leading the way for the Browns with 8 carries for 26 yards and 1 touchdown. Then Devin Singletary for the Texans with 13 carries for 66 yards and 1 touchdown. Receiving the ball, David Njoku was the leader for the Browns with 7 catches for 93 yards and a couple drops. And for the Texans, you had Nico Collins with 6 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. So taking a look at the total offensive output in this game, Cleveland clocked in at 324 yards, with Houston edging them out with 356. So that's a difference of about 32 yards. The turnover battle was one-sided in this game. Cleveland had 2 turnovers, and they were both pick sixes, which was detrimental in their victory efforts, because those are points that went directly to the other team. Both were on back-to-back drives in the third quarter. Time of possession was actually led by the Browns in this one. They held the ball for quite a bit longer, 35 minutes and 26 seconds, compared to 24 minutes and 34 seconds for the Texans. Now, breaking down the offensive yardage, you'll find 268 yards passing for the Browns, 280 yards passing for the Texans. This is because the Browns lost 39 yards to their 4 sacks, whereas the Texans did not allow a single sack to CJ Stroud. Rushing the ball, both teams were okay in this one, with Cleveland amassing 56 rushing yards and Houston amassing 76. Red zone efficiency was dead even. Both teams made it to the red zone 3 times and converted 2 of those times. And in the penalty category, it was pretty even as well, with Cleveland having... Cleveland went 2 of 2. The Texans went 2 of 3. So, actually, in terms of efficiency, the Browns were more efficient in the red zone. They just couldn't make it as often. And then in penalties, Cleveland was penalized 4 times for 32 yards, and the Texans 3 times for 20 yards. So, worse in the sack category, worse in the turnover category, worse at rushing the ball, a little bit worse in the penalty category. There are a lot of things going wrong for the Browns. They had a good run. Joe Flacco looked elite for quite a few games there, but he did struggle quite a bit in this one. And yeah, they just couldn't get it done. They also went 0 of 4 on 4th downs. This was mostly towards the end of the game. You have to try, but that is pretty detrimental to their efforts as well. So that is what led to a Cleveland Browns loss in this one. So they go home, and the Houston Texans advance to the next round of the playoffs. After that, you had a matchup between the Dolphins and the Chiefs. This was a very cold game in Kansas City, one of the coldest temperatures ever recorded for a playoff game. I know at points of the game it felt like negative 28, I believe. The Chiefs would go on to win this game 26-7 with their home field advantage. Tua Tagovailoa completed 20 of 39 passes for 199 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception, whereas Patrick Mahomes completed 23 of 41 passes for 262 yards and 1 touchdown. Rushing the ball, Raheem Mostert had a quiet day with 8 carries for 33 yards, whereas Isaiah Pacheco had 24 carries for 89 yards and a touchdown. Receiving the ball, you had Tyreek Hill leading the way for the Dolphins one might guess, with 5 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. And on the other hand, you had a very nice day from Rashee Rice, rookie wide receiver, with 8 catches for 130 yards and a score. Offensive output, there's a huge disparity in this game. The Dolphins could only put up 264 total yards of offense, whereas the Chiefs got 409. So that's a big difference of 145 yards. The turnover battle was actually even, with both teams turning the ball over once. The Chiefs lost a fumble, whereas the Dolphins threw a pick. In terms of time of possession, Kansas City held on to the rock for quite a bit in this one. They held on for 34 minutes and 5 seconds, whereas the Dolphins only had 25 minutes and 55 seconds with the ball. Now breaking down that offensive yardage, you'll have 188 passing yards from the Dolphins and 262 from the Chiefs. This is because the Dolphins lost 11 yards on their 2 sacks, whereas the Chiefs did a good job of protecting Mahomes. They didn't allow any sacks at all to him. The difference in the ground game was pretty significant here, with the Dolphins only getting 76 yards rushing in this one, whereas the Kansas City Chiefs got 147 yards on the ground, so nearly double that of the Dolphins. Another big point of emphasis is red zone efficiency. The Chiefs were only 2 of 6. I mean, making it 6 times is quite impressive, but 2 of 6 is not the best efficiency. But that far supersedes the Dolphins, who could not make the red zone at all in this game. Their sole touchdown came off a very long touchdown grab from Tyreek Hill, so just bad at moving the ball. One reason for not being able to move the ball down the field would be their penalties. The Dolphins suffered 8 penalties for 62 yards in this matchup, whereas the Chiefs suffered 5 for 45 yards. And another factor is the 3rd and 4th downs. The Dolphins struggled tremendously on 3rd down, converting only 1 out of their 12 attempts, and they were 3 of 6 on their 4th down attempts, which means they didn't convert 3 times, so 3 turnovers are on downs, whereas the Chiefs were 6 of 15 on 3rd down, and they converted their only 4th down attempt. So all these things piled together for the Dolphins: penalties, sacks, inability to rush the ball or throw the ball in this cold weather. They extend their streak to 0-10 in games where tip-off is below 40 degrees. So the Dolphins really can't play in the cold. But yeah, their season is over. What looked like a very promising season for the Dolphins comes crumbling down. And it's really all thanks to that Tennessee Titans game. They had a 4th quarter meltdown, lost the lead in that game. Had they won it, they would have gotten the 2 seed. They wouldn't have had to be hosted by the Chiefs. They would have hosted someone in this round. Maybe they would have progressed further. But I guess we'll never know. And for the Chiefs, they live to see another day, and they will go on the road next week to play against Buffalo. This will be Patrick Mahomes' first ever AFC Road playoff game, so I'm excited to see how that pans out. After that, you have the Packers and Cowboys game, because the Bills and Steelers game was flexed into Monday due to a snow blizzard. So the Packers, they beat the Cowboys brutally in this one. It wasn't very close. At one point, the Packers led 27-0, but they finally won 48-32. Jordan Love had a tremendous game in his playoff debut, posting very similar stats to CJ Stroud. He completed 61 of 21 passes for 272 yards, 3 touchdowns, whereas Dak Prescott completed 41 of 60 passes for 403 yards, 3 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions. Rushing the ball, Aaron Jones found great success against this Dallas defense with 21 carries for 118 yards and 3 touchdowns. What a day from him. Tony Pollard, on the other hand, had a modest day with 15 carries for 56 yards and 1 score. Receiving the ball, you had a very nice output from Romeo Doubs, who had 6 catches for 151 yards and 8 touchdowns, whereas on the other hand, you had yet another productive day from CeeDee Lamb, who had 9 catches for 110 yards. So if you take a look at the offensive stats in this one, it's a little bit surprising because Dallas led the way in offense. They had 510 yards of offense, whereas Green Bay had 415. But Dallas also won the turnover battle by quite a bit, 2-0, 22-0. Time of possession was also led by the Cowboys, who held the ball for 31 minutes and 5 seconds, whereas the Packers held the ball for 28 minutes and 55 seconds. So let's take a look at their passing offenses. The Packers got 272 yards through the air, whereas the Cowboys got 387 yards through the air. This is because the Cowboys lost 16 yards to their 4 sacks allowed, which is quite a bit. 4 sacks is not good in a playoff game. On the ground, it was the edge to the Packers. They gained 143 yards on the ground, whereas the Cowboys gained 123. Red zone efficiency was actually pretty similar. The Packers were a perfect 4 of 4 in the red zone, whereas the Cowboys went 4 of 5. So not a huge difference there. And penalties, the Packers actually led the way. You had 7 penalties for 66 yards on the Packers, whereas you had 6 penalties for 48 yards on the Cowboys. I can also see that one of the scores from the Packers was on special teams or defense. Yeah, in the second quarter, Darnell Savage had a 64-yard interception return. So that is what made the game 27-0. Even though Dallas is doing pretty good in all these stats, when you fall into a hole like that, 27-0, unless you're the Jaguars, you're not going to climb out of that hole. So yeah, they had a lot of stat padding towards the end of the game. It wasn't really close at all at any point. The Packers were playing prevent defense at the very end of it, trying to make sure they don't get into the end zone, so they were willing to give up more yardage. But what a game from the Packers, and what a game from Jordan Love. They come into Dallas, who was 8-0 at home, and they steal this victory. The Packers extend their streak of being undefeated in AT&T Stadium in the postseason. It used to be Aaron Rodgers. Now Jordan Love adds to that streak, and Dallas gets sent home in embarrassing fashion once again in another postseason run. After that, you have a game between the Rams and the Lions. This was a fun one, our closest game of the weekend by far. The Detroit Lions would end up getting this victory 24-23, and this was a big rivalry game. You had Matthew Stafford facing his old hometown and home team in the Detroit Lions. They've done something that he was never able to do. They won the NFC North, and Jared Goff is playing against his old team as a whole. And so, yeah, lots at stake here. Both guys trying to prove it that they're the guy for their new team. Obviously, less pressure on Matthew Stafford having already won a Super Bowl with the Rams, but Jared Goff making a name for himself in Detroit, and he was able to do so. He played very well. Both quarterbacks, both receiving cores, amazing passing in this game, amazing catches, top-notch offense all throughout. It was a very entertaining game. Matthew Stafford finished with 25 of 36 passing for 367 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was also playing through a big hand cut. He got his hand cut in the second quarter. Jared Goff, also a very good game. 22 of 27 passing for 277 yards and a touchdown. Rushing the ball, Kyren Williams had a little bit less success than usual from what we were expecting of him. He had 13 carries for 61 yards, whereas David Montgomery had 14 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown. Receiving the ball, you had 2 star-studded wide receivers showing out. Puka Nacua adds to his record-breaking rookie season. He sets the record for most receiving yards by a rookie in the playoffs. He had 9 catches for 181 yards and a touchdown, whereas Amon-Ra St. Brown adds to his All-Pro resume. He had 7 catches for 110 yards. So taking a look at the offensive output in this game, the Rams actually led the way with 425 total yards of offense, whereas Detroit only had 334. Very clean football being played by these 2 guys. No turnovers allowed by either team. And first downs, very close. 22 first downs by the Rams, 23 by the Lions. And time of possession was about as even as it can ever get. You have the Rams holding the ball for 30 minutes and 5 seconds, and the Lions holding it for 29 minutes and 55 seconds. So, let's see. Breaking down their offense, the 357 yards through the air for the Lions, and the 255 yards through the air. 357 yards through the air for the Rams, 255 for the Lions. Both teams allowed a few sacks. The Rams allowed 2 sacks and lost 10 yards from it, whereas the Lions allowed 3 sacks and lost 22 yards from it. Rushing the ball, both teams had an okay day. You had 68 yards of rushing from the Rams and 79 yards of rushing from the Lions. But the biggest difference maker in this game, which was once again a one-score game, was the red zone efficiency. The Lions, they were gutsy in this game. They went for it on 4th down. They got it at like the 1-yard line. So the Lions finished this game 3 of 3 in the red zone. The Rams, on the other hand, were very efficient in the red zone going into this game, just could not get it done. They went 0 of 3 in the red zone, and ultimately that was their demise. Both teams not too penalized. You have 4 of 36 4 penalties for 36 yards on the Rams, 5 penalties for 34 yards on the Lions. And yeah, both teams converted their only 4th down. Both teams were 3 of 9 from 3rd down efficiency. So truly a very even matchup, and it just came down to red zone abilities. The Rams don't get it done in this one. They unfortunately go home, but they had a very nice season and ended the season and put up a great effort. And the Lions, they lock up their first victory in 30 years in the playoffs. Well, honestly, their first playoff game even. They haven't hosted a playoff game in 30 years, and they get their first victory too. So that's their first victory since I've ever been alive. Let's see if they can keep this up. Next week, they go on to host the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. After that, we move into the Steelers and Bills game. Once again, this game was postponed due to weather. The Bills won this game by a big margin, 31-17. In this game, wonderful game from Josh Allen. He's pretty productive in the playoffs. Mason Rudolph led the way for the Steelers. He got the start once again. They were riding the hot hand. He finished 22 of 39 passes for 229 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Josh Allen, on the other hand, completed 21 of 30 passes for 203 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rushing the ball, Jaylen Warren was the leading rusher for the Steelers with 8 carries for 38 yards, and James Cook led the way for the Bills with 18 carries for 79 yards. Receiving the ball, you had Pat Freiermuth, who led the Steelers with 5 catches for 76 yards, and you had Dalton Kincaid, who led the Bills with 3 catches for 59 yards and 1 touchdown. So, offensively, the Steelers put up 324 yards in this one, whereas the Buffalo Bills put up 368. That's a difference of 32 yards. 42 yards. The Steelers lost the turnover battle in this one at a margin of 2-0. You had a George Pickens fumble in the first quarter of this game, and then in the second quarter, you had a red zone interception, which was very costly for the Steelers. They finally got some momentum. They took it all the way down the field, and then Mason Rudolph threw a pick in the end zone. So, unfortunate timing on that. You also had like a controversial non-turnover in this one. Very much seemed like Pat Freiermuth lost the ball inbounds, and it was recovered by the Bills, but the officials called that he was out of bounds when it happened. Based on the replays, maybe there was like a fraction of his faceplate that did graze against the ball. I wasn't personally that upset with the call. I wanted a good game, so I was okay with the Steelers retaining possession, but who knows if they really did deserve the ball there. Offensively, the ball was held by the Bills for 33 minutes and 19 seconds, and held by the Pittsburgh Steelers for 26 minutes and 41 seconds. In terms of offensive production, you had 218 yards passing from the Steelers and 189 from the Bills. This because the Steelers allowed 1 sack and lost 11 yards off of it, whereas the Bills allowed 2 sacks and lost 14 yards off of it. Rushing the ball, the Bills clearly had an advantage, outrushing the Steelers 179 to 106. In terms of red zone efficiency, it was actually the same. Both teams went 2 of 3 in the red zone, but penalties were a big factor. Pittsburgh was penalized 6 times for 50 yards, and the Bills were only penalized twice for 24 yards. The Steelers also were unfortunately unable to convert their only fourth down attempt. It came in the fourth quarter of this game, and honestly, there may have been a bit of holding. George Pickens ran a route at the top of his route. He was held. There was a bit of tugging on the back of his jersey, a little bit of grabbing as well. The ball was thrown his way, but no penalty was called. George Pickens was furious after it. He made some comments about how you can't beat the Bills and the referees at the same time. Now, I don't think that the referees were biased towards the Bills the entire game. I do think that they could have gotten a call there, but I don't think it would have really won them the game at all. It wasn't even a close game at that point, in my opinion. But I understand his frustration. So yeah, that is how that game ended. The Steelers have now lost 5 straight playoff games. They are still looking for their first playoff victory since 2017, whereas the Bills, they continue their season. They will host the Kansas City Chiefs, which is a new one. They're so used to going to Kansas City, and they beat Kansas City earlier this year. So very interested to see how that will turn out. And lastly, the final matchup of Super Wildcard Weekend was a game between the Eagles and the Buccaneers. And, the Eagles season grows more and more disappointing with every week. After that, week 12, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers take the victory in this one in a blowout game, really. They win this 32-9 against the Eagles. Not close at all. You have Jalen Hurts completing 25 of 35 passes for 250 yards and 1 touchdown, whereas Baker Mayfield had a spectacular playoff performance. He goes to complete 22 of 36 passes for 337 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is an elite performance. Rushing the ball, the Eagles really struggled. They had 10 carries for 34 yards, whereas the Buccaneers were led by Rachaad White, who had 18 carries for 72 yards. Receiving the ball, no A.J. Brown in this matchup, so Devontae Smith, he showed out. He did everything that he could, caught 8 passes for 148 yards, whereas Cade Otton was the leading receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, recording 8 catches for 89 yards. Taking a look at the offensive output in this one, you'll find that Philadelphia struggled, only putting up 276 yards, whereas the Tampa Bay Buccaneers put up 426, so that's a difference of 150 yards. No turnovers in this game, actually. Pretty clean game in that regard. But time of the possession was dominated by the Buccaneers, with them holding the ball for 34 minutes and 3 seconds, and Philly only seeing the ball for 25 minutes and 57 seconds. So breaking down their offensive yardage, you have 307 yards through the air for the Bucs and 234 for the Eagles. This is because the Buccaneers had 4 sacks allowed for 30 yards, and the Eagles had 3 sacks allowed for only 16 yards less. Rushing the ball, the major difference in this game, Tampa Bay had almost 3 times the rushing yards. They finished with 119 yards rushing, whereas the Eagles only have 42 yards rushing. Ironically, the Buccaneers were worse in the red zone in this one. They went 0 of 1 in their red zone attempts, whereas the Eagles went 1 of 2. So that is one thing that the Eagles did right. Another thing that the Eagles did correct was They were worse in the penalty battle. They had 6 penalties for 54 yards lost, whereas the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had 5 penalties, but only 25 yards. But one of the biggest things in this game was the inability to convert on third down for the Eagles offense. The Eagles finished this game 0 of 9 on third down. They didn't convert a single time, and they went for it twice on fourth down, and they were 0-2 in those attempts. So, yeah, they really were only playing with the first 2 downs of every drive, and then their game was over. Stymied on offense big time. Not only do you lose this game, the Eagles, they suffer a big loss to their offensive line. Jason Kelce was seen crying on the sidelines after the game, obviously very emotional after the end of their season, and he announced that he'll be retiring. So Jason Kelce has played his last game in a Eagles uniform. He has done, he's called it a career, finishes a very, very decorated career with a lot of accolades, a Super Bowl winner, and yeah, he'll be remembered as a one of all-time greats in the offensive line, especially at the center position. But yeah, the Philadelphia Eagles meltdown in this season needs to be studied. I am so surprised that they started off 10-1. They finished the season 11-6, and if you include the playoff loss, 11-7. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, on the other hand, good job to them. Baker Mayfield really proving it, as he's done his entire career. He led the Browns to their very first playoff victory in a very long time, and he gets yet another one here. So Baker Mayfield now with 2 playoff victories, proving the world wrong once again, and as always. And yeah, the Bucs get to travel to Detroit to play in a matchup against the Lions. That I think will also be very fun. You have 2 number 1 overall picks that people had kind of written off, their old teams had discarded of them. So Jared Goff versus Baker Mayfield, I think it could be a very, very fun game. So yeah, there you have it. That is Super Wildcard Weekend summed up, all 6 games of action. Next week, the other 2 matchups that I did not mention would be a game between the Texans and the Baltimore Ravens, and the Packers and the San Francisco 49ers. So we've got 4 big matchups in divisional weekend coming up, the divisional round, and they should be a lot of fun. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you like content like this, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. I'll be putting out more videos as the week goes on. Realistically, I think it's just one more video on this Friday, which will be a sports betting video. I actually recorded this video already. Oh wait, no, I'll also do a predictions video. I forgot about that. I recorded this video once yesterday, and I don't know what happened to it. It was too slow in the beginning and too fast at the end. The audio and video desynced in a irrecoverable way, so I don't know what to do with that footage. The first take of this video will just have to be scrapped completely, so I was going to post something last night and I wasn't able to, so hopefully this will come out clean and okay. But yeah,